thank you ever so much for joining. We're just going to wait here for a minute or two for a few other people that we can see joining now to join us, and we will start. Okay, well, let's get this show on the road. So, folks, welcome again. Thanks ever so much for joining us this afternoon. We have got a short but hopefully very insightful session for you on best practices for data-driven personalization. There are various changes happening out there with regard to how data is collected and how, and more importantly, how that's going to have an impact on best practice standards in this area. There is also a lot of misunderstanding in the market about what these changes are and how they're going to impact digital business. So hopefully this session will clear up some of these misunderstandings, as well as give you a much clearer view on what best practice will look like moving forwards. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Eddie Swindell, CRO and co-founder of FreshRelevance. And I am honoured to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Jim Kelly. Jim's principal consultant of BlueVen, the leading CDP and omni-channel marketing hub. Jim has got an incredible experience working with some of the most influential brands in the UK and further afield, both on their data and also their wider marketing strategy. So, Jim, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Eddie. You make me sound omnipotent, but I'm not, so thank you.
Well, I would disagree. But before we jump into the session, I just want to take a couple of minutes for Jim and I to introduce FreshRelevance and BlueVen. Our companies are really great examples of true best-of-breed technology and service providers. And we are really very well placed to help the industry adapt to the changing environment with respect to customer data and how it's used to improve customer experience, but more broadly, business efficiency. So FreshRelevance, in a nutshell, is a personalization and decision engine that automates the customer experience using a really versatile range of tools. It integrates with your existing tech stack to really drive conversion rate and retention, ultimately delivering a much more valuable, a much richer customer experience. There are some key components of this piece of technology, and that is, firstly, it's modular. And that means there are a range of different cross-channel tools that FreshRelevance customers and users can pick from. And these are tool-specific and also channel-specific. For example, there is a web module and an email module. So actually both of these channels can be used independently or fully joined up in terms of a personalized automated customer experience. Also, a common theme here is an incredibly easy to use user interface that can be used by a really wide range of people inside of the companies that we serve. And finally, a real depth of functionality that really provides a rare range of a rare combination of features that really provides a very rare opportunity to allow companies to do a lot more with a lot less. We work with way over 350 clients, and we make a huge amount of impact on their business. Up to 20% of sales is usually attributed to the activity that clients are performing with FreshRelevance. And we have worked with Bluven. We've got multiple mutual clients. We've worked together for quite a number of years now. And this really shows how important an effective data strategy is in all areas of business, especially when it comes to personalization, customer experience, as well as wider marketing, sort of based on this data or understanding of the individual. Jim, I'm going to pass over to you to talk a bit about Bluven and how that fits in here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. The image you can see on your screen right now is logically representative of every single MarTech stack. Whether you have technology that helps you through all of this process, or whether you do it manually or partially manual and partially automated, this representation is how the consumers on the left-hand side, you can see the icon there, joins through to marketing in order to deliver this clean, unified view of who the person is, and then being able to empower marketeers and business decision makers, not just marketeers, that's quite key, to analyze, segment, plan, and then execute marcoms back to the consumers. You will notice straight away that this is a closed loop approach, and that promotes iterative learning, iterative improvement, and iterative trustworthiness and cleanliness of the underlying data. But if we start off on the left-hand side, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, happy to answer any questions you have, but ultimately on the left-hand side, you have the customers engaging with and interacting with your touch points. Now, those touch points actually might range from e-commerce, emails, SMS, personalization hubs, CRM. You could have one-to-one. If you're B2B or B2C or even B2B2C, the experience is exactly the same. Part of the challenge here on the bottom left is that all of the interactions and the facts and the descriptors that underpin the relationship you have with your contacts exist in multiple different systems. So the very first requirement, if you like, is to collect and ingest that data. And you'll see the FreshRelevance logo there on the bottom left, just above the word interact. And that's an indication that web behavior is not just a nice to have anymore. It is a critical indicator of browsing behavior, who likes what, who is responding to what, but also the entry and exit point of people to your website and those HTML driven touch points. So if you think about which advert they clicked going through to your website, if you think about which link in an email they clicked, that can all be captured by FreshRelevance and brought into the collective data pool you have for an individual. And this is actually quite key, and one of the most important reasons why we've worked with FreshRelevance for such a long period of time. They are pretty much second to none around how they consult with organizations in order to bring that data to the data fabric of the organization. And then you're moving the information through cleansing, standardization, verification, matching, merging, deduplication, and ultimately ID resolution, which is where you are presenting an enhanced version of the consumer behavior directly to marketing. So the bottom piece is in blue here is all about single customer view, customer data platform, master data management, whatever phrase or terminology you prefer to use internally. There are multiple approaches, but ultimately the end goal is the same. How do we gain consent-driven, trustworthy data? And then across the top, you have the process that all marketeers are typically used to deploying. Analytics and reporting to understand behavior, attribution, what worked, what didn't. segmentation and targeting, where you're using the insight and information you're deriving from the underlying data fabric of the organization in order to plan and personalize either very simple campaigns or very complex journeys. And then after the communicate and engage, you will see another FreshRelevance logo where they are one of the critical pathways to not only personalization, but the delivery of mechanisms to incite additional customer behavior. That can include, recommendations, click-throughs, personalizations, pop-ups, dialogues on screen. All of those things are driven by FreshRelevance intervention. So at real time, being able to intervene in the consumer, this iterative cycle of interaction, FreshRelevance and their approach is critical to getting this right. Hyper personalization is predicated upon the accuracy of information. So I really don't want to play down the blue part at the bottom of this slide, but additionally, there's no point having a cleansed, trustworthy view of data if you're not able to activate it. So channels like FreshRelevance are critical to achieving that. I'm going to throw back to you there, Eddie, because I think we're going into what this actually means. Now, identity strategy, as I've just mentioned, is not just about identity graphs. It's not about matching and merging. It's about the entire end-to-end process of audit trails, compliance, governance, everything that we need to actually prove in order to mitigate any financial risk of being fined for inappropriate use of data. And identity strategy means that identity resolution and identity profiles are core to the way that you operate your business. Happy to explore this in additional detail at any point, but for now, let's move on, I guess, and actually talk about how one of the key facets of this, which is online digital behavior, is impacting our ability to have an identity strategy which is trustworthy, which is driven predominantly by cookies, what they are, how they work, and why they're posing an issue right now for lots of organizations.
Thanks, Jim. That's exactly right, and it's such a topical issue at the moment, and we're going to spend a bit of time talking about this. But firstly, we've got quite a broad audience here today, and so before we go into any more detail, it's nice just to sort of draw a line under some sort of basic definitions of the different types of cookies that we're going to be talking about, and then we're going to talk about why these are important, and what's happening out there in the industry with regards to restrictions on these different types of cookies. Anyone involved with web data will know the role that cookies play, but not all of these cookies are equal. So on the left-hand side, you can see first-party cookies. Now, these cookies that are set directly by the website, either by JavaScript or actually by a web server, they're just a small text file that's loaded by the website, and only the same domain can access these files. They allow website owners to remember individuals and individual sessions, collect analytics data, and perform other really useful functions that just provide a really good user experience. Moving on from there, we have got third-party cookies, which are created by domains other than what the individual is currently visiting. That's why they're called third-party cookies. It's not the website they're currently on that's deploying the cookie. They're generally used for a different purpose, and they're used for cross-site retargeting, tracking and retargeting of ads or ad serving. Now, in the quest to track website visitors, some businesses have gone further than third-party cookies by using what we call super cookies, and actually that definition can mean different things to different people. A common practice that comes under the banner of super cookies is what we call fingerprinting. This can involve creating a digital fingerprint of a user, looking at a range of different variables that can attempt to identify that visitor in different ways. They are more difficult to delete, and they are often blocked, making it really impossible for users to protect their privacy when browsing online. Browsers are cracking down even harder on this practice, on super cookies, in a bid to protect user privacy. For example, Firefox stopped tracking ad tech and Firefox are stopping tracker and ad tech companies who abuse these browser features by allowing people to follow people around the web, making changes to really greatly reduce the effectiveness of all of these cached super cookies. And this is often done under the premise of wanting to keep user data safe. Now, things are happening out there in the industry. Restrictions are changing. And if we just have a quick look at a timeline of what those changes are and what's likely to happen in future, it'll set an interesting context for the other things that we're about to discuss.
Can I just say that previous slide, as I've just really looked at it, is probably the most unattractive looking cookies I've ever seen.
Yes, I won't be eating one of those today. But mentioned previously, Firefox actually kind of made the first move here back in 2019, where they started blocking third-party cookies by default. Safari were close behind them, blocking third-party cookies and also preventing the use of super cookies. Now, last year in 2020, we saw an interesting move by Safari, with them being the first browser to actually place some kind of restrictions on first-party cookies. And this is still current as we speak today, in that Safari will expire first-party cookies after 7 days. We've got a week of this cookie life, and we're going to talk about this in quite a bit more detail later. You know, the implications of that and what we need to do as a result of that restriction. Also in 2020, Firefox restricted tracking of, Chrome prevented the use of super cookies, and in 2021, Firefox makes super cookies useless for cross-site tracking. The latest news in this area is that Chrome will entirely block third-party cookies in 2022.
So let's just let me just jump in there for a second, because I know that you're talking about this from a FreshRelevance perspective, and I'm approaching this from a customer data platform perspective, and actually the impact of what that means to clients. So there's nothing wrong with this, right? This is good. This is about protecting privacy on the face of it. But one of the key conversations that I'm having with many clients is that there is clearly an agenda here, which is something that you and I have spoken about the transition of power from advertising networks, walled gardens, DMPs, to the device manufacturers. And that change is not something that we're in control of as marketeers. It's being enforced upon us. We have to be ready for these changes, right? And I know that you alluded to, in principle, this looks like the right approach, but those agendas could actually make it harder for us to do our job properly.
Indeed, and you're exactly right. I mean, it's so interesting that it was actually Firefox that made the first move here. And, you know, of course, they've done so for what are, you know, probably close to really genuine reasons of privacy and protection of the consumer. However, it may be perceived that subsequent browser owners like Google or Chrome and Firefox and Safari, owned by Apple, have got a slightly different agenda here. Of course, they have a very different business model to Firefox in that they are international media companies. But all of that aside, there is going to be a huge impact on the industry and how we need to go about reshaping best practice. And currently, at the moment, a lot of marketeers and people involved in digital commerce just aren't ready. Some research that we have got here show that a huge amount of marketeers heavily rely on cookies for their marketing. And more than half of these really fear that third-party cookie blocking will massively limit their ability to personalize the customer experience. As you'll see as we go through this, and what you might have sensed already, that this really isn't necessarily true. It isn't the third-party cookies that are generally being used for on-site customer experience.
The other thing that I would add here, Eddie, is that 44%, I think that's too low. I think that the other 56% probably don't know how much third-party cookies are involved in their marketing.
Yeah.
So if you advertise through Google or Instagram or Facebook, any of the walled gardens that the advertising network promotes your ads on behalf of the information you give to them, then you rely upon third-party cookies. If you use a DMP or a DSP, demand side processing, for advertising or retargeting, you use third-party cookies in that process. So that number actually appears a little bit low to me.
Yeah, that could well be close to the point there. Obviously, moving on, we're talking about cookies here in the context of collecting data, with a real focus on moving to first-party data. And so, Jim, with the changes in the landscape in mind, it really becomes critical to adapt to optimizing the ID resolution. And I know you've got a huge amount of experience in this area, and it would be amazing to hear that, and so that the listeners can benefit from some of this experience that you have there.
Yeah, so if you flip onto the next slide, I think what we're really talking about is how we achieve a personal record, individual level record. Now, there is a common misconception that if you create a person record, then that's the only way which you can refer to that individual. That's actually not true. So we have a whole range of clients from lots of different verticals where the individual record is part of a larger view of the consumer behavior. Now, actually, what I mean by that is if you think about retail, the individual retail is king, right? So you have a basket, you have returns, you have orders, you have complaints, and they're all linked to the linchpin of how the individual person is relating to your products. But if you think about travel and leisure, that decision of purchase and the process of making that purchase, maybe it involves more than one person. It may involve several adults in the same house. It may involve several adults across multiple houses. It may even involve children. If their children are anything like mine, they place demands upon where you go and what you do when you get there. So travel and leisure isn't just about the person view. It's about the person, individual personalization, but the personification of the rest of the household experience is also quite key. Yeah. So when we're talking about identity resolution, it varies by vertical. It has to happen at person level, device level, browser level, and it has to happen at premise level and company level when you're talking about B2B. That is the entire view. Now, when we're talking about first-party cookies, we're doing so specifically, Eddie, from a data, consent, and compliancy perspective. It's not just about gathering data.
Yeah.
It's about gaining consent and authority to use that information from the individual. So moving third-party data to first-party data when any PI or personal information is available is critical to the success of getting this right.
Yeah.
You don't need PI or personal information to I have to be careful on language here, to personify the individual. You can make recommendations based upon other individuals' behaviors.
Yeah.
But the second you get PI, you have a capability of joining behavior to a first-party individual.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And it's at this point where consent, ability, accuracy are critical.
Yeah.
And I know that you and I have talked about the differences between personification and personalization, and I think you come on to that next.
Well, that's an amazing segue.
A critical flow here, right?
Yeah.
Because unless organizations move from third-party data to first-party data, there is a gradual demise of what they can and what they can't do.
Yeah. So this is actually a super interesting point, and we need to know what we can do to drive identity, but in some cases we really need to provide a great customer experience without knowing who the individual person is. Moving forwards with first-party cookies being subject to greater restrictions, we're just going to have to accept the fact that some identification rates might be lower. And in which case, we really need to turn our attention to personification tactics. Now, personification can mean different things to different people. If we just look at the Gartner definition, personification is the delivery of relevant digital experiences to individuals based on their inferred membership in a defined customer segment rather than their personal identity. And it can mean different things to different people. I know, Jim, from chatting to you, I know you've had some really interesting definitions of personification from some clients, right? Hello. Oh, I think I may have lost. I think I may have lost Jim. I will carry on.
Sorry, I was frantically clicking the button to unmute. I am here. What was the question, actually, Eddie?
Just talking about aside from the Gartner definition of personification.
Yeah.
I know you've come across some alternative definitions out there in the marketplace, or people that see certain things as being personification, when maybe even they're not actually.
Yeah, I mean, every organization does require both. Personification really is about behavioral driven segments where you don't know who the person is. So you don't need to know who they are or where they live or what they do, what they bought or anything. It's just behavioral. So, for example, of the people that bought this product, they also bought this product. That's personification. That's about behavior. It actually doesn't matter who the person is, but what you're saying is people that bought this also bought this. There is a correlation between one and the other behaviors.
Yeah.
But actually saying people like you bought this is personalization.
Yeah. Good stuff. Just looking at some examples of personification, because there are loads of examples around about how personification is being used actually in different contexts. And here, I don't know if anyone today actually does, sort of marketing, like travel marketing, if they're in travel brands out there. Pinterest now allow travel marketers to target based on persona. And here you've got 5 of them defined from, a group vacationer, a culture chaser, spa sojourner, through to an eating explorer. And so this is, we don't know who these people are, but we can target advertising on Pinterest, make the creative ready and the proposition accurate and targeted and relevant to people in these specific personas. And so Ironically, actually, many travel customers and prospects that are targeted in this way don't get a similar level of persona-based experience once they've reacted to or clicked on one of these ads on Pinterest. That's another discussion. So, what's good about personification as an alternative? Well, it can be incredibly clever. It can be based on billions of observations on shoppers and what they're doing, and look for patterns in behaviour. With certainly with FreshRelevance, a range of different AI and machine learning tactics. But more importantly, no cookie consent is required for this level of personalisation. So it's much more respectful of consumers' privacy in that respect. However, less information is available. We don't know anything about the individual. We're often making some assumptions, but then again, this kind of marketing, it can be a real balance between art and science. And
there is actually one point, Eddie, here that I just want to add about personification, where there are times you can get it wrong.
Yeah.
Less information being available, absolutely key, absolutely right. But because you made the point about actually making assumptions,
yeah,
sometimes those assumptions lead to bad outcomes. Perfect example is the largest online retailer. I'm sure everybody knows who they are. The largest online retailer doesn't personalize, in my opinion, sufficiently. They personify. So during lockdown, I actually bought some equipment for my bicycle, and there were some spanners and some socket sets and some wrenches in there, and it was to enable me to bring my bike up to standard so I could actually take my bicycle out. Since purchasing that, this largest online retailer has constantly recommended other spanners and wrenches to me. Now, clearly, I don't collect spanners and wrenches. I have no need for multiple different packs of bicycle spanners. I've got one pack, I've bought one. And this is a perfect example of people that bought that also looked at this. Yeah, but once I've purchased it, Eddie, I don't want to be told about the other stuff. I want to be told about a more personal experience. What should I be buying next?
That's exactly right. And again, Jim, thanks for the incredible segue. Because in terms of best practice and moving forwards, then the ideal approach should actually encompass or blend both personalization and personification. A real simplistic way of looking at it is personification for the unknown and personalization for the known. And that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but it can actually go an awful lot further. For example, experiences can be targeted at personas. One such persona might be a gifter, someone whose behavior is clearly showing that they're not buying for themselves, they're buying for another person or a range of other people. And targeting based on that persona shouldn't at all be restricted to people that are unknown. It's a really, really valuable persona. So, our recommendation here is to really blend these approaches to get them right. There's another thing that we really wanted to touch on in the session, and this does get a little bit techie, but it's certainly whilst we're talking about personalization, data capture, and cookies, it's really important to address server-side and client-side personalization as part of this discussion. Again, really high-level description here. Client-side is really to do with cookies and content being delivered generally via JavaScript, as opposed to server-side, where cookies and content are delivered by the web server. So why is this important, and what does this actually mean? Well, if we look at client-side personalization, the benefits of this are, one, it's incredibly easy and flexible and quick to implement. The negatives are all of the restrictions that we've been talking about when it comes to cookies, first-party cookies today and what might happen in future are much more obvious with client-side personalization or client-side cookie deployment via JavaScript. Now, when we look at server-side personalization, this is different. Where the cookie is dropped by the server, it's currently not subject to the same restrictions by Safari as client-side cookie deployment. And the same is the same said for content as well too. And this can be all sorts of types of content, where if deployed by some JavaScript, could be in some cases perceived as advertising content. However, server-side personalization does not have this level of restriction or scrutiny. It's more secure. It can integrate better with web development frameworks. Now, that does mean that more technical expertise is required to deploy a solution in this way, and that means that it can take longer, and it can also mean that tests are more laborious, take longer to implement, and in some cases see the results from. So again, as we're going through this transition, it's really important to consider, if at all possible, a hybrid approach. There will always be space for client-side testing of content and deployment of cookies. To really simplify this, initial testing of experiences or optimizing types of personalization, yes, client-side is absolutely the right way to do this. It's really quick to deploy, it's quick to see results from, it's quick to optimize. However, it's going to be even more important moving forwards to be able to balance this with server-side personalization and data capture, so that the best performing experiences can be deployed in this more robust way that's less susceptible to the restrictions that are being placed today by browsers, and maybe increasingly more so in future.
It's also really key, Eddie. Sorry to jump in there, Eddie. It's really key to point out that we're not just talking about web personalization here. Web personalization, email personalization, app personalization, the entire digital experience, any of those touch points that rely on the delivery of HTML through any mechanism can be personalized and personified, as pointed out by Eddie. So this isn't just about web. I don't want you to think that this is just about recommendations or AI-driven recommendations. It's also about abandoned baskets. So, and perhaps you want to touch on that, Eddie, that abandoned baskets aren't just about recognizing the basket's been abandoned through a trigger. It's also about being able to recreate the basket at the point of basket exit.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it is a really valid point, and recreating the basket at the point of exit, but also back on re-entry as well too to the website, which can be an incredibly good way to optimize the effectiveness of campaigns like basket recovery. Guys, just with time, constant time, just moving on. Jim, just to summarize, thoughts here, collective thoughts on optimizing the tech stack for the future. We've talked about some really critical areas, and I guess sort of boiling this all down into these main points. We've talked a lot about identification using first-party cookies. And actually, one of the things that I think we'll see increasingly more of in future is not just the identification of users, but tactics to re-identify users, where first-party cookies may have been expired by the browser that the user's using. Now, there are all sorts of personalization tactics based on what an individual is doing at a particular moment in time. Also, personification tactics can be used to target messaging to browsers on a website to encourage them to log in, to register, to do one of these things that's actually going to re-identify the user that's been previously identified. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on that, Jim, or actually any more of these points before we start really wrapping up.
Yes. So of all the clients that I have, there is no doubt that the importance of moving from third-party data to first-party data is critical to the success of the organization. Not being able to identify your consumer still means that you can personify the experience, but not being able to identify the consumer means that you have no accuracy, you have no targeting capability, you have no personalization capability, which is what you talked about quite succinctly. But importantly, attribution is absolutely impossible. I mean, if I have 100,000 devices, I actually don't know how many of those devices are used as part of the same purchase pattern. Not the individual, but the same purchase pattern. If you take insurance or financial services, the actual customer experience there tends to involve multiple devices and multiple people. If you've ever tried to fill out an application form for insurance, for a car or loan or credit card or anything else like that, or even, completing a holiday, which is multiple steps, you can't necessarily do that with ease on a mobile phone. You may transfer your approach to a laptop or a tablet. So this is not about how do we transfer data from third party to first party for the sake of it. It's actually about how do we maintain the customer experience that our customers are used to while taking on board the technology changes that are being enforced upon us.
Indeed. I think I will wrap up by saying just a couple of things that I think summarizes this quite nicely, and that is, we've heard phrases like the cookie apocalypse, the death of cookies, and these typically are these phrases are used by companies where that are far more reliant on third-party cookies, but the fear and uncertainty around first-party cookies are unfounded. And if any technology company is talking to online businesses with black box super cookies or fingerprinting tactics, that is really bad. These will be stamped on, more rigorously by browsers, and maybe even moving forwards by the ICO. Cookies are not dying. Third-party cookies are dying. First-party cookies will, for the foreseeable future, be a fundamental part of any personalization or data strategy. However, they are being restricted more, and they should not be used in isolation. We all need to have our eyes on how we can use tactics like personification to enrich a customer experience in the absence of having an individual's identity, should that first-party cookie be eroded by the browser.
And it's interesting, right? Because the advertising industry, which actually has created the momentum to get rid of third-party cookies, is worth $128 billion a year.
Ooh.
It's not going to die. It's not going to go away, but it is going to change. And of all the clients I have, I mean, I actually deal personally with a large number of brands across many verticals, and their biggest concern is that Apple, Google, the primary advertising networks going forward haven't necessarily published how that's going to happen. And their concern is, how do we get ready for whatever the change may be? And it's relatively straightforward. It just requires a few changes to the approach, the tech stack, the strategy, and perhaps even the culture of an organization. But without making those changes, the impact is going to be felt financially, manually, and resourcefully, you're going to have to work really hard just to maintain the status quo if you don't prepare for a change which is imminent.
Indeed. Well, guys, on that note, one final thing. Actually, the majority of topics, actually, and some more that we've covered in this presentation today, are all covered in quite some neat detail in this ebook, the personalization buyer's guide to identity resolution. That's available to download on FreshRelevance.com/identity-resolution-guide. So it would be absolutely delighted if you guys can download that and get some benefit from it. On this topic that's incredibly topical, important, that we take seriously now and in future. So guys, thank you ever so much. I do apologize to I know we've gone over time, so I do apologize for that, and the fact that we haven't actually responded to the questions that have been asked in the question window. But I do promise that we will follow up with you all the people that have asked questions. We'll follow up with you all individual by email after this session. So guys, thank you ever so much for joining. Jim, thank you especially for your time and your contributions today. Much appreciated.
Always available for you, Eddie. It was a great session.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, look, thanks ever so much, and hopefully speak to you again soon, and hopefully we'll get to speak to as many people in the audience today as possible as well too. But thank you ever so much for joining.